everyone. This panel is Hirohisa Soda's Super Sentai Extravaganza. Is there anyone here who's not familiar with Super Sentai?
Whoa.
I love the pointing.
So basically, Super Sentai is what comes to America as Power Rangers. So we have grown-ups in rainbow-colored spandex fighting monsters. And it is awesome most of the time. There have been some series. Before I get into the introduction, let's just show the opening. See?
Did we hear this?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's something.
Yes, so Hirohisa Soda's Super Sentai Extravaganza. Born in October of 1947, Hirohisa Soda was hired on by Toei to be a writer, or actually no, before that, he got hired by Tatsunoko to work on an anime series called CHANGEMAN. He would then, because of his success with CHANGEMAN, Toei decided to hire him to work on the first Super Sentai series, Himitsu Sentai Go Ranger. He wrote 19 of the 84 episodes that came out of the show, which was actually quite a lot for one writer to do. Toei liked him so much that when they had gone through different periods of Super Sentai after Spider-Man had taken over and was the first live-action show to feature giant transformable mecha in live action, which I probably already said that, but oh well. They asked him when Super Sentai, the Marvel Comics era of Super Sentai, had come to an end with 1981's Sun Vulcan, if Soda would be interested in taking over as the lead writer for Super Sentai. Soda lasted 9 years. He is to date the longest showrunner for a Super Sentai franchise. His first series, Gogol 5, kind of started out as just being more of the same that you saw in the 70s. So this series was pretty much kind of a transitional period. Like the music was pretty classic 70s Sentai music, the way everything's executed, and it was also, second last series to you before they started using spandex costumes. So I have here a video clip of the team from Gogol 5. Go Go 5, which was a series about a bunch of sports people because you had the Olympics going on in 1982. Toei decided initially they were going to do a baseball Sentai series. They decided against that because Soda was very big on science and technology. That was his main theme. That's what he learned with Gatchaman, and that's what he liked to stick with. So he did the next series, Dynaman, which was about a group of inventors who had to fight an evil underground empire. So here is a little bit of Dynaman.
That was the sound of Michael Bay having an orgasm.
So after Dynaman came in, Soda decided, hey, I'm going to try something new out. He brought in some space aspects to the series, especially because late 70s and early 80s, what was a big thing at that time for sci-fi? Star Wars. So Super Sentai became heavily influenced from Star Wars. So his next series, Bioman, featured alien robots that came to Earth and put in these bioparticles into people to help defend the planet if it ever came to that case. Now, the one thing that stood out in Bioman is in this series, there are no monsters of the week. The villains have their own generals who are pretty much the monsters of the week every episode. And when you'd have the mech scenes, they would pilot their own mecha rather than growing big. Yes, I couldn't resist putting the lightsaber sound effects in there. So Bioman was also the first Sentai to feature the death of a female ranger. Because in Gold Ranger, there was a second Yellow Ranger who took over for about 12 episodes, and then he was killed off. It seems like it's always the Yellow Ranger for some reason. Well, in Bioman, the actress who was playing Yellow 4 just one day decided not to show up for work. And they don't know what happened to her. Supposedly she had gotten pregnant and was embarrassed by it, so she just quit acting altogether. But so we have here a death of the Yellow Ranger and then a clip of her replacement. Now, CHANGEMAN, the next series, is quite notable because it featured a female White Ranger. Actually, so technically it would be the first White Ranger ever. It was also the first series where the theme was based, where their Ranger suits were based on mythological creatures. They didn't really have anything else based on mythology. It was just like, oh, you're going to be a dragon, you're a griffin, you're a mermaid. But it was the start of something of where things would come later on in the series, especially in the 90s when they would start experimenting with all the themes. And one thing I love about Changeman and FLASHMAN is it has some really impressive camera work in my eyes, where you'll have all these cool battle scenes where it's like a long-standing battle where the camera is just gliding across the screen looking at all the stuff going on in the fights. Now, FLASHMAN from 1986 is my personal favorite of Soda's Sentai shows. Now, in this show, in 1966, 5 babies from Earth were kidnapped and taken to an alien planet where they were raised by aliens to go back to Earth to defeat the evil villains, or as I call it, Stockholm Syndrome. One of the things that makes this series really cool is that it loves to break the Sentai mold. There's one episode where the mech is damaged, so the Rangers are fighting a monster. If they blow up the monster will grow. So if the monster grows, they don't have a mech to fight the monster with. So they come up with this idea because the monster can shrink things. So they get the monster to shrink itself, and the Yellow Ranger feeds it to a fish. It is like the most brilliant thing, because they're like, well, we can't defeat the monster because he'll grow big, so what should we do? Okay, fish food. But then it's funny because later on he returns as a ghost. So I have here, though, a clip that has the most obvious song you could use with FLASHMAN.
Let's go!
Now we find the right spot. All right.
I'm not even going to say a word.
Yeah, that song's pretty easy to use in FLASHMAN, but I couldn't resist. So our next series, Masked Man, kind of broke the mold in a way of what you would see in a Sentai theme, because instead of using science and technology, this time Soda decided, hey, let's use ki power, or chi power, energy power, aura power. So this one was based around martial arts and kind of a mystical aspect combined with science and technology to harness it for the mecha and everything. So here is a little bit of Masked. Now, Masked Man has a feature in it. It has what is essentially the first sixth Ranger of all, for Sentai in general. He only lasted one episode. In fact, he was maybe transformed for 90 seconds. But he was a prototype in multiple ways. For one thing, he is what led to Barai Dragon Ranger in Ranger in 1992. His design is also based on what the original designs were going to be for Masked Man, which harkened back to Battle Fever J, where they had actual molded faces for their helmets. And I lost the thought on the other thing. Oh well, here's X1.
That was a bit anticlimactic.
What's that? Oh. So our next series, Live Man, starts out as a team of 3, a Yellow Ranger, a Blue Ranger, and Red Ranger, which is usually the basics for Sentai. And then later on, in the second half, is when they added a Green and Black Ranger to the team. They're an animal-based series, kind of similar to what Sun Vulcan had done in 1981, only this time they did a little bit more with the animals when it came to mecha, which I'll get into later. Is there anything I missed on that one?
This is not the Turbo Ranger.
No, this is not Turbo Ranger yet. That's next. Oh, actually, that in mind. This is also the series that was airing when Japan went from the Showa era to the Heisei era. Now fully into the Heisei era, Hirohisa Soda decided to try another new theme, this time cars and fairy magic. It's very strange. It's actually, there are a lot of people that love this show. It's actually one of my least favorite Sentai series. It's also the only Sentai series that the Rangers never do an entire roll call at all during. They don't go around saying who they are. It's pretty much, we're Turbo Ranger, and that's it. Now, one interesting aspect about the show is it is technically the first Super Sentai show to have Ranger in its name. Because Gold Ranger, even though it's called Gold Ranger, Toei's official English spelling is R-E-N-G-E-R. So it's not actually using R-A-N-G-E-R. So it's technically their first Ranger-based series. This was also the first series that they decided to use high school kids as the Rangers. Which, yeah, it actually does draw some parallels to where Haim Saban would have come up with the idea for Power Rangers, even though he had actually been trying to bring Power Rangers to America ever since Bioman. He would just keep trying over and over, and the TVs were like, nobody's going to want to watch that. Nobody cares. That's stupid. Nobody wants that.
How did that work? Yeah.
And also, even Dynaman, that I forgot to mention, had a parody dub that aired in the US for about 8 episodes. Yes.
Yeah, so I actually watched a few of those episodes.
Did you?
Yep. One of the weirdest things I ever saw was in the background. There's an old Green Bay Packer flag in the background. I'm like, what the heck? Green Bay Packer? What the heck is Wisconsin doing a Japanese?
There are actually a lot of series that will have uniforms. The Blue Ranger in Die Ranger wears a Yankees uniform, if I recall. One Ranger, which series I just watched? One Ranger will wear stuff that will have like English sayings on it. But yeah, there's a lot where it's like that.
Well, Yankee, you understand, it's New York, LA, but it's Wisconsin. I mean, I'm from Wisconsin, but it's like, Wisconsin?
Hey, just think they're repping your state.
Well,
I don't know, but just the Midwestern states, like, how do they
maybe it
know
was
about
just a decision to go with the cheese.
Wait, it was the 80s, so maybe they won a Super Bowl back then. I don't know.
Oh, they won more than the Bills.
All right, here is a look at Turbo Ranger. The final Hirohisa series came in 1990, which is not a very well-received series. It redid a lot of ideas that were already done and not even in the best way possible. But the new concept that this series did is that all 5 Rangers were siblings. In fact, the Black and Yellow Ranger were also twins. So in this series, the Rangers are pretty much, their parents are scientists on another world trying to regrow life back to that world, and aliens invade, and so the Rangers the parents send their kids off to Earth while no one knows what happened to them. So the Rangers became teachers and planned for whenever the alien invaders would invade Earth. So here's a look at FIVEMAN. Now, FIVEMAN did feature the first upgrade on costumes for the Ranger forms. They were pretty lackluster when you get down to how things are today, where the new forms are always flashy and the biggest thing ever, and the episode's very epic. When the episode first premiered this upgrade, it was just the Blue Ranger that unveiled the upgrade, and he was the only one that fought in it. It wasn't until the next episode when all 5 transformed into their upgrade forms.
CHANGEMAN, CHANGEMAN.
Now, supposedly, for those of you that buy Super Sentai on DVD in America, supposedly Shout Factory has licensed FIVEMAN and will be releasing it. They also had brought out in the Power Rangers comics the FIVEMAN costumes as their own Power Ranger team named Sonic? Super Sonic?
Yeah, Sonic Ranger.
Yeah, which when that came out and everyone's like, oh, they brought FIVEMAN, I'm like, oh, this must mean Shout Factory has licensed it so they can get Power Ranger fans familiarized with the costumes before Shout releases it. So if Shout has indeed licensed it like it's been rumored, then that's my theory on what happened. So the mecha. I have here a whole string of mecha from all 9 series, which there were a lot of significances done in the 80s. CHANGEMAN featured the first underwater mech battle ever. FLASHMAN featured the first series that had a second mech. Masked Man continued with the second mech, which I think was kind of not that all impressive. The first mech in Masked Man. The first mech in Masked Man was the first time the Rangers all got their own individual mecha. In fact, Masked Man was originally going to be called FIVEMAN. And Masked Man was also meant to be a homage to an anime trilogy series because it followed a lot of the similar themes. The other thing I liked about the mecha in Masked Man Great 5 is a lot of the mecha in the 80s have boxy looks to them, whereas he was actually kind of angular. He had this kind of shield crest to him. Now, for Dynaman and Changeman, I feel like their mecha, they look like Dairuger 15 or Vehicle Voltron. Live Man featured the first animal mecha, because even though there were animal-themed series beforehand, they were always just vehicles. This series, it was a straight up, the lion looks like a lion. And it also featured the first series where the 2 mechs combined into one. Turbo Ranger featured the first transformable base that would turn into a mecha, and they introduced a sidekick mecha, as it were. And then FIVEMAN features, to me, one of the coolest Sentai battles of all time for mecha.
Darling, it's better down where it's winter. Take it from me. Outside the shore, they work all day. Out in the sun, they slave away. While they devoted to
But I'm not done yet. Call right now, and I'll triple the offer.
だろうか。
消えろ。ファイブロボにも水源を教えてくれ。
Oh, goody.
So those of you that might be used to Power Rangers, you'll notice that the mechs are usually a lot more angular, a lot more, well, until more recent times they were movable, whereas those mechs were very boxy, a lot of them. And that was one thing that the 90s really revolutionized, was in terms of the mecha compared to what you just saw from the 80s. But it is interesting, if you watch Sentai in order, seeing the progression of how they get from where they started with in mecha, because the original transformable mecha in Denjimon has like really long legs, and it just seems like this overly complicated transformation sequence because they had to drag out the runtime since they were at 25 minutes apiece back then. And then getting into where you see with Grade 5 having a little bit more angles compared to the other mecha, which I feel like the next mecha that took over, the one that was like doing the backflip, he felt like a step backwards compared to what they did with Grade 5 before that, because he just didn't live up to that mecha. And then what they did with FIVEMAN using animal mechs, all this would lead into what you knew with like Power Rangers Season 1 where they had dinosaurs, which was like, for Japan, oh my god, we have dinosaur mecha? That's freaking awesome. And then it would continue there with mythical beasts for Dairanger. And then what they would try for the ninjas. And so on from that to nowadays where we have like 20 million pieces of mecha for one 50 episode show. Where sometimes like, why is there a mech battle in this episode? It did not need to be there. But then again, the 80s had the same problem, is that there were a lot of series where there was a mech battle every episode, whether it needed one or not. Like sometimes it'd be like, hey, there's now a monster of the week in this episode that we just threw into the plot because we need a mech battle. And that's another thing that I liked about with FLASHMAN, is that not every episode did have a mech battle. So now moving into the villains. Well, my personal favorite category for Sentai. Because for me, if you have shitty villains, your series is most likely not going to be very good. The villains can make or break a series. Perfect example is the recent Lupin Ranger versus Pot Ranger. I liked a lot of the concepts used in the series. I thought the opening theme song was amazing, but the villains sucked. And therefore, the show really dragged because of it. Now, villains back in the 70s were pretty much there just because the heroes needed something to fight. As I said earlier, Star Wars was a huge thing, so a lot of the villains in the series started becoming alien threats. We had also Changeman decided to start, Soda decided with Changeman, he was going to give the villains complete personalities. Some of the villains were going to receive backstories. One of the villains in Changeman, in later half of the series, you get to meet his wife and daughter, or son, wife and son. In FLASHMAN, because the villains were the ones that kidnapped the Rangers as children, there's that personal stake in the matter of the Rangers wanting, in some ways, to get revenge for the villains taking away their childhoods. And then you get in FIVEMAN, the villains in the first episode kill some of their friends who are also the friends of the Rangers. So that also puts a personal stake in them. And FIVEMAN is all about grading, basically. And then we have Turbo Ranger, which the show was doing so poorly in ratings, they decided to kill off all the villains halfway through and bring in new ones. And then we have FIVEMAN. So here is just a sample look at the different villains.
存します。よくぞ申した。
For dry, red eyes, clear eyes is awesome.
ネギのダイナワは私が通す。
証明する素晴らしい計画だ。
かな人間どもとライブマンとやらに思い知らせてやるがいい。願いましては63,521円なり93,041円なり56,923円なり74,948円なり116,662円なり96,2,111円では56,7,196円なり。
What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
Now. You're looking at now, sir. Everything that happens now is happening now.
What happened then?
That's it.
When?
Just now. We're at now.
Go back to then. Now.
Now?
No, I can't. Why?
You missed it.
When?
Just now.
So that's the sample of the villains from that era. As I said, they all varied in personality. Some were really well done. Some were just there. Some had a lot of character to them. One of my favorite actors for Sentai, actually my favorite Toku actor, Hirohisa Soda, that's the name of the panel. Yutaka Hirose, who had played a few of those villains, is my favorite actor of Toku of all time.
I prefer Joji Nakata.
But yes, one of the other actors you saw in there was Joji Nakata. He was the guy with the whip when I played Whip It, and the one that was touching the one kid. You may know him as Alucard in Hellsing, Monte Cristo in Gankutsu, and what else has he done? Many, many, many things.
Everything.
Yeah, there's like millions of animes he's been in that for some reason I can't remember now. Now with the villains being done and over with, essentially, there was one thing though that I consider to be the true villains of FIVEMAN. See, FIVEMAN, to me, like I said, was not a well-received series in Japan. In fact, the ratings were so bad that Toei was like, you know what? We're going to do this series called Jetman, which is going to go back to being a homage to Gatchaman, because it's going to be a bird theme. We're going to follow ideas from that. And then we're going to put Super Sentai to sleep. We're going to end it there. Well, Jetman had such high ratings, Super Sentai has been continuing to go on since, as we know, currently. Well, so Toei was like, this series wasn't bad in my eyes until this spot showed up. These characters completely ruined the entire series for me, where I'm like, I'm out, I'm done, I don't want to watch this anymore, this is bad. And one of the villain for this makes me think of Cartman from South Park with the way his face is designed. Yes, so that to me, when those puppets show up, they're in about 10 or so episodes. For some reason, they have to give commentary. I guess Toei was like, well, since the ratings are dropping, we need to do something maybe to get more child viewers, so let's put some puppets in there because that makes total sense. And then, so they'll do running commentary of times of like, you'll be in the middle of a battle in the show, and suddenly you'll cut to the puppets going, oh no, the Rangers are losing, what are we gonna do? Oh man, are they gonna win? And just completely pulls you out of the immersion of the show. Anyone have any questions on Hirohisa's era? Yes?
Wish they can keep on doing it, but a lot of people are sensitive now, like with the stuff they did back then. Like how the Rangers died and all that, they get cut. Or, like you said earlier, how their friends or even them died.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there is, it's interesting because there's like one monster in FLASHMAN, he basically does what Cell did to people. He's a bug creature, he sticks his
Proboscis?
yes, into people and they disintegrate. Obviously, because it's live action, they can't show them actually melting. So what they just do is they just have them fade out with their clothes are all that remains. And it makes it so that the villains feel like a threat. Because when people can die, it means shit's real. With modern stuff like with Lupin Ranger again, the first few episodes established that all these people have disappeared from this one villain. Well, only the Lupin Rangers know it's from the one villain. And everyone online was like, oh my god, they've killed all these people. It's like, no they didn't. They didn't kill these people. This is modern Sentai. They're going to turn out to be alive at the end. And most of them were. There was only one that kind of hinted that that person was dead because it's said that the villains, when they have human forms, they're using the skin from their victims. But that was like such an afterthought in the series, there was no impact from it. So yeah, when villains these days can't kill people, I'm not saying you need to have people dying for the sake of dying, but when there's a threat level, if people die, like in Time Ranger, there's this one monster of the week who's from this really bad prison cell. And he is just shooting people down the street with his like shotgun type weapon. There's a copter in the sky. He shoots it and it crashes into the building, so you know the newscaster and everyone in there is dead. There's a guy on his like cell phone talking in his car. The villain walks by, throws a grenade in his car, walks away, and the guy looks and kaboom. In fact, when I reviewed Time Ranger last year, I even did a death counter for that. So one screen when he's walking, and you see all these bodies, I just start counting, like, okay, how many bodies are there to add into the death counter? So yeah, villains are more threatening when there are actual stakes involved.
Yes?
Yes, Thanos.
Is modern Sentai toning it down in so that for like Power Rangers' sake? Or?
Not that.
They're actually doing it because there's a change in Japanese censorship.
Yes.
It's actually affecting all mediums, not just...
Yes, perfect example, because all mediums are changing. So Toei just released the Dragon Ball Z movies on Blu-ray in Japan. First time on Blu-ray, they're remastered, but they edited them. They took out the middle finger, so when Trunks gives Broly the middle finger, it's now just a fist. When Gogeta gives Janemba the middle finger, it's just a fist. So censorship is now affecting Japan, just like it did in America back in the 90s.
Well, and it's kind of ironic because the American culture is actually loosening up some of its television because you can now hear F-bombs, shits, depending on the time of day and what channel it is. So it's amazing how things are changing. Another good example, not really just for tokusatsu, but for Gantz, Psychopaths, and a few other shows, they showed extremely edited versions on television and people were not able to see the uncut products when it was airing until after it had a DVD release, which was a year later. And another example, not entirely sure if you're all interested in it, is that Yuri on Ice show, which I love. The scene where they kiss and everybody knows what they do in one of the episodes, they can't actually show it because it's against the law in Japan.
Yeah, even
So their censorship is just much worse.
the one Toku series, Garo, I didn't talk about this last night, but when Garo first came out in 2005, it airs at 1 a.m. Friday nights. They could do anything. So the show would have full nudity and everything. Now, even though it would air at 1 a.m., they have to obscure women's breasts and everything because they can't just show full-on nudity anymore. But that's for the hentai panel, not the Sentai panel.
Any other questions?
And we are out of time, so if no more questions, thank you guys so much and for bearing with the technical issues. Have a great night.